going to try to use my really loud voice today. This session is titled Developing Student Agency, Increasing Engagement, Moving to Ownership, okay? 3 really big topics that I could spend a day on each of them. So we are going to get the overview of it. I'm going to send you with some resources, some ideas to get started. And you should have, when you leave, a 5, 10, 20-day plan of something that you want to try when you get back to wherever it is you're going, okay? So, first of all, my name is Paula Kaiser. I am from Wisconsin. I spent 20 years in the West Dallas, West Milwaukee School District, which has about 10,000 students in it. I taught at the elementary level for a whole bunch of years. Became an instructional coach, where I specifically was working with the Next Generation Learning program, started 7 years ago. That was our personalized learning at the time. From there, I transitioned into a district administrator, where I oversaw curriculum for K-12, math and science, and all of the personalized learning at that point. Currently, I have a very different role. I am still doing instructional coaching, but I'm doing it through Activate Pathways. With that role, I am spending a good chunk of my time consulting at an alternative high school, where we are really reconceptualizing everything you can imagine about school, from the way it's done, the hours that kids are there, how students are interacting with their learning. And with that, I also, within my state, for the CISA that I work with, am the accountability trainer. So everything state report card, all of those accountability pieces, I also work with. So I kind of live on both ends of the spectrum of state accountability, and let's be really creative and innovative about that. A lot of my work that I do is around developing a learner profile and having the students really get to know themselves so that they take that ownership, so that they have a deep understanding of who they are, what they bring to the learning, and they can really then own that. So, let's get started. According to the fall 2005 Gallup poll, Engaged Today, Ready for Tomorrow, what percentage of students overall reported feeling engaged? 21, 29, 50, 70. You're going to talk about this at your table, but I want to talk about 2 things. What do you think they reported? What do you see with the population you're working with? So you're going to pick potentially two numbers. What did they report? What percentage of the kids you work with do you think would report being engaged? 1 minute, turn and talk. If you could wrap up your conversations. All right. I need you to take a stand here. So that means that when I say the number that you think, I want you to stand up. I'm going to do it twice. Okay? What do you think they reported? And then what do you think your students would report? So first question is, what do you think was reported on this poll? How many people think 21% felt engaged? 21% feel engaged. Awesome, thank you. Who thinks 29% of their students reported feeling engaged? Okay, little bigger number there. Who thinks 50% of the students reported feeling engaged? Are you guys all from the same area? Do you all have the same school here or district? No? Okay. 70% feel engaged. Nobody? Okay. Now put your own school hat on, or your district hat. How many would report that 70% of your How many of your 50% would feel engaged? Couple? 29? Yeah? 21? Okay, interesting. Well, here's what it shows. In this poll, 50% of students said, I feel engaged in my learning. 29 said, not engaged. The 21, actively not engaged. I am just not only sitting there avoiding work, I'm probably the ones causing the disruption, trying to get everyone else off task too. I am actively trying to not be engaged. Resonate with a few people? Yeah, you can see all those kids in your class, right? Here's what I want you to think about. Why do you think students are reporting this? What's the disconnect? Turn and talk. What's going on? Why are they reporting that? Yeah, go ahead.
But the way you posed the question, are we responding to the students actually feeling that way, or they're only reporting that they feel it?
Either way is fine. We're trying to get down to what are the root causes. So why do we think that they're not? Yeah. Whether they are or not, that's what they're reporting out to people. Yeah, that's what they want the world to know, right? Because they know they're doing a survey on this. Absolutely. Okay. So hopefully at your tables, you've talked about a few root causes. Why might they have reported that? What's going on with those students that they would have made them say that? I am actively not engaged, I am not engaged, or yeah, I'm engaged. You all have 3 Post-its now. I want you to take a couple minutes and define engagement. So identify 1 to 2 things that you believe engages students in learning. So you got to get inside the kid's head a little bit right now, right? 1 to 2 things that you believe engages students in learning. And then on that, I want you to include a why. So the STEM would look something like this. I believe blank engages students because. About 30 seconds. I believe blank engages students because. Okay, here's what you're going to do. You're going to talk about these with your table group. You're going to find commonalities. So things that are the same or about the same, I want you to put together into a stack. I want you to leave the other things that are the outliers, a different idea that somebody has, in piles by themselves. Okay? 2 minutes, turn and talk. Okay, if you could wrap up your conversations. So as I've worked with several different teams, this is a conversation that I pose, or the question that I pose all the time. What is real engagement, and how is it developed? These are the most that we talk about. Engagement is developed when there is real, authentic purpose in learning, and students feel ownership. Raise your hand if your table had something like that. Real, authentic purpose in learning, and students feel ownership. Yeah, okay? Another one. Engagement is developed when students feel connected and have relationships. Raise your hand if you had something like that. Okay? Not as many, it didn't look like. The next one. Engagement is developed when students have self-awareness and agency. Little description about that. Self-awareness of who they are, what they know now, what they need to know in the future, and have agency that they can make choices about how they're going to attain those. Who had something similar to that? Voice and choice and self-awareness. Awesome. The last most common one is engagement is developed when there is fun and enjoyment in learning. Okay? So, look at your other post-its. Did anybody else have anything on there that's not included in this list? Any table have something different? Very similar? Okay. Here's my disclaimer. I use this question when I'm working with district administrators, working with teachers, coaches, working with teachers, teachers, working with parents, everybody working with students, right? It's all the same list. So, students, teachers, school leaders, district leaders, this list applies to you. Doesn't matter what entry point you're coming from, you should be designing all of your learning opportunities, whether it's staff learning or student learning, with those things in mind. Okay. When we talk about deciding where to start, now we're going to get into the good stuff. To have really true systematic changes, you need to know why you're doing it. You've got to have a vision and a mindset. You need to know how you're going to do it with easy-to-address structures. You need to know what you're going to do with intentional practices. When we come in your room, what will we see students doing? What is that intentional practice? And then what are the resources you need to make it happen, right? You need all three. I leave resources as kind of a separate little category, but you need all three of those. The why, the how, the process we're going to use to get it done, and then the what we're intentionally going to see. And then we engage students through building relationships, developing student agency, and transferring ownership. Those are the three categories I'm going to talk about today on the right. And we're going to look at the how, the why, the how, and the what for each of those. So we're going to start with building authentic relationships. That's one that a lot of you said, yeah, we talked about that. So why is it important? When we build authentic relationships, it builds a culture and a trust and opens the lines of communication. Students aren't going to share when they're struggling, what they're struggling with, whether it's at home, at school, on the playground, in the locker room, any of that, if they don't have a culture of trust with you. It notes areas of disconnect between what is observed and what is self-identified. That's my favorite one. As a teacher, I thought I knew my students really well, right? And I would say to my students, here's what you need to work on. I looked at your work, here's what I noticed, this is what you need to do. When you flip that and you let the students do more of the talking and you don't lead with that talking, you'll find out what they actually believe about themselves. It goes both ways. You'll have kids that are achieving pretty well. And as a teacher, you're like, yeah, that student is fine. When you really talk to them, they have a low self-esteem and they'll report out that they're not doing as well as what you believe they're doing. My daughter is this one. Her name is Hannah. And from the time she was little, we'd be like, Hannah, I'm gonna use the volleyball example. They would just get killed. 20-something to 0. I mean, it was just terrible, right? We'd be like, how did it go? What'd you think of your game? We played so hard out there. We did such a good job. It was that all the time with her. Everything was great. Life was good. Everything was happy, right? To the point where we had to be like, okay, listen, you really aren't that good. You really need to work on a little bit more of this, right? The same thing happens with your students where they will report themselves being really, really great at something, and you need to figure out where that disconnect is. So opening that lines of communication so you can have those honest feedback conversations is really important. And then it develops a network. Who are the people who are going to be in the student's life as a learner? How do you do this? This is the process part. If you guys already have the why, you know the why, awesome. Perfect. You're moving on. How? First of all, we have to embrace that every learner is unique. So we have to look at every single individual in our classroom, not groups of students or not a class of students, but we really need to look a careful look at each student individually. We need to develop respect and communication between the student and teacher, the student to student, which are the two that we do really well. The student to self is the one that we sometimes overlook. What do I know about myself? What am I bringing to this situation? What are going to be the challenges that I'm going to have going into this learning opportunity or this social environment or whatever? They have to know themselves really well. The student to self is the one we overlook the most. So how do we do it? How do you build authentic relationships? I have 4 points. The things on the right will be resources that are available for you. So you'll get those. I think there's a link somewhere on the website. If not, send me a message, I'll get them to you. Building authentic relationships. I've heard in a couple of different situations today, people talking about self-reflection. Self-reflection is the starting point of moving forward. I actually heard somebody say in one of their presentations today, students need to engage in self-reflection on an ongoing basis. And I love the idea of the power of yet to set goals. So your students who have a little self-esteem issue or getting down on themselves really easily, flip it around. Yeah, that's a struggle for you. You're not there yet. How are we gonna get there? So using that power of yet is a huge one for me. Favorite things, unique qualities, using those to guide choices based on purpose. Understanding learning preferences to make mid-course corrections. That's a big one that I really focus on. Learning preferences, auditory, kinesthetic, visual learners. You get into the learning modes. I mean, we do a lot with online learning now. There are some kids that just don't prefer that as their primary learning mode. So if they're struggling, what is their primary learning mode and how do we get them help in that mode? Do they like, my friend back here said, I don't really want to be interactive. I just want to sit and listen today. That's his preferred learning mode, right? Yeah. So every time I'm going to make them do something, it's going to be like, here we go again. Other people wish they could be getting up and moving around and pacing the room right now. That's your preferred learning mode. So keeping those learning modes in mind. This is really going to drive me crazy here. That's my cue that I've talked too long on that part, I think. The next one is my favorite, two-way authentic feedback. As we talk about grading practices and things like that, we talk about formative assessments, providing feedback, timely, appropriate, relevant feedback to move learning forward, right? The two-way is when you say, tell me about your learning, what's going on? I doing as an instructor that's working for you right now? Where's the disconnect? What could I be doing more of or less of to help you as a learner? So opening that conversation and letting the kids give you feedback on what you're doing that's working for them and what you could be doing more or less of. Now, are you ever going to get everybody all on the same page? No, but that really taps into it, and that really starts to give that student a lot of ownership. So you'll get the resource for that too. Turn and talk quickly. Which of those 4 or something else resonates with you as a place you would like to start with relationships? 30 seconds. So as you're choosing this, you've got your why of why you would want to do it. You've got the what right here. Are there any processes you would need to put in place? For example, two-way authentic feedback. How are you going to get that back from the students? You might not have time to have a one-on-one conversation with every single student. How are you going to do that? You could do it through a Google form, right? They could give you your feedback, all of those things. Exit slips, right? Yep. What's the process you would need to put in place to allow for that to happen. It's not just going to naturally happen. How are you going to get students to start self-reflecting, to start talking about their goals with the power of yet? Setting and reflecting on goal setting right now. What would that look like? So you need the process, not just the what. A lot of times we like to have the big why, we like to have the what you're going to do, and we forget to think about how we're actually going to make that happen in a sustainable system that's not going to be, I'm going to do this for 5 days, and then something's going to come in the middle, and that's going to be the end of it. You're looking for sustainable processes for the how you're going to do that. All right, let's go on. Growing student agency. So why is this important? Establishes self-awareness. If I don't know who I am, if I don't know where I've been, who I am now, and where I want to go, it's really hard to create a purpose for any kind of learning. If I can't connect that. So you have to know where I've been, where I am now, where do I want to go. Fosters self-reliance and independence. This one is a real strengths and struggle kind of thing. So what strengths do I have within myself? What struggles do I have? Really good at working in groups. Love talking about things and digging in. I don't like it as well when I'm working alone. Okay. So tests, when you're all by yourself, are going to be a struggle for you, right? How are you going to work through that? You know that about yourself. How are we going to work through that? So it's about them just being aware. You don't overlook it. You don't say, oh, you're just not good at that. We're just not going to do it. You say, that's a skill or disposition that we need to grow and develop within you. How can we do that? And it connects self to others. When they learn that they have a network of people they can go to, and that connection is there, everything gets better. And I did the skills to monitor dispositions. I'm a big skills and dispositions person. What dispositions are innate in me? They're just me. I don't have to work too hard for it. It's just who I am. And which ones do I have to work a little harder for to make that part come out? So that's a big one. I heard somebody mention that earlier. I was in a session and somebody said, we're talking a lot about academic achievement. How do you measure that soft skill? Dispositions, all of those things, whatever you want to call them. That's a huge topic. And that's when I talk about learner profiles, having the students identify which of these are like me, somewhat like me, or not like me, and then how can I leverage those in my learning? That's how that happens. So that's the why. Why do we need student agency? How do you develop it? This is one where the procedures and the process are long-term. Student, long time to build. Some kids will just have it innately. They're the ones who traditionally would have been probably your more challenging students, because they're coming up to you saying, I don't want to do this, I want to do this instead. Or this is dumb, I don't want to do that, I already know how to do that, and they're demanding something else, right? So I told you I work with an alternative school right now. I always, as soon as they say something like, this is dumb, I don't want to do it, wow, I like the way you're exuding your student agency there. That's really awesome. Let's talk about what you need to do or what you're going to do then. Here's your target. Here's what you need to hit. How are you going to do it? So if you flip your mindset about that's not the challenging student, wow, that student's got a lot of agency. Might need to focus a little bit, but there's a lot of agency going on right there, right? So how are you going to make the plan and monitor that plan over time? How are you going to work on that? And then how do the students become keenly aware of what they know and what they need to know? How are you going to help them get that understanding of who they were, who they are, and who they could become? So a couple of ideas, except it's not working. Anywhere? Oh, there we go. So, when we talk about growing student agency, it's identifying personal strengths to leverage in the learning opportunities. What do I bring to this? Scaffolding learning with questions rather than answers. That's a really big one. We used to have our teachers pre-plan. So when the students come to you and have a question, you got to ask 3 questions. What are the 3 questions going to be? And we did a lot with, you guys use depth of knowledge, right? You guys use the Hess cognitive rigor matrix at all? That aligns Bloom's and DOK together. We would have them say, this is where the kids need to be based on what you want, what they have to do. What 3 questions above that would scaffold to that level of learning? So what is your factual question? What's a reasoning question? And then maybe what's an application question that would get them to that level? So we practice pre-planning those. Those don't just come, as a teacher, you're doing 25 different things all at one time. So when a question comes to you, to take that moment to pause and say, let me ask a factual question first to see if they understand the basics. Then I move it to a reasoning question to see if they're at that level, and then I move it down from there. So thinking about what questions you could scaffold with, goal setting and monitoring, and engaging other people to create a network of support. Those are the ideas to grow student agency. So turn and talk at your table for 1 minute. What are you currently doing that already is working to grow student agency, or what would you add next? 1 minute. Really what that shows is they might not have that ownership.
Right.
That learning might not have been theirs
Well,
yet.
they haven't had the training in the beginning slide when you talked about it. You've got to train them to do what you want them to do.
Yes.
Frequently, the kids that I was sitting in on were kids who were not doing as well, and I think they got ashamed when they were in front of their parents and did not want to admit that their behavior in school was not as on point as their parents would have hoped.
That's a whole different problem, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so even maybe an awareness of, here's where I've been, so let's show the growth you've made then. So a student like that, structuring your student-led conference to say, here's where I've come, here's where I am now, here's where I want to go, so that you can see that growth piece. Yes. And the structure and the training isn't necessarily a checklist of show this piece of work, then tell about this goal, right? Like that's not the kind of structure and training you're talking about. You're talking about the DOK 4, right? Like you're really, really in depth. Okay. We're gonna go on. So the last part we're gonna talk about, maybe, is the student ownership. Or not. So, I will just chalk. Good thing I brought my my notes that I wrote all over too. So when we talk about ownership, that is really then, so up to this point, the teacher is still owning a lot. This is a lot of training, which is the conversation we were just having at this table. To build a relationship, the teacher has to go out of the way to get those avenues structured, right? When you're talking about agency, you're still really guiding them through it. When you flip to ownership, you're now kind of taking a step back, and they're doing the majority of the talking. they're doing the majority of their goal setting. And you're guiding them. You're providing them the support. You're providing them the structure. So why do you need goal setting? How are we going to do it? But they should be filling in a lot of the what at that point. So you've given them a really good sense of themselves. You help them develop a really good sense of themselves, what their strengths are, where they struggle, so that they can say, going into a learning experience, wow, this part's going to be really hard for me. Here's what I'm going to do proactively to overcome that. That's when you know students truly have that ownership. When I go in and I say to the students, hey, what are you working on and why are you working on that? And they start to talk about I was wondering about this, I needed to know more about this, when you start to hear them use that word I a lot more, and not, well, the class is working on this, or my group was assigned something, some of those pieces. So that's the big part about ownership there. To get to ownership, it's really, we talked about this earlier, but it's really increasing that student talk time. So your talk time should go down. The student talk time should go up. They should be engaged in more of the conversations. They should be setting goals and identifying key milestones that they're going to be their checkpoints to come back and meet with you to find out how they're doing on their goals. See, it's not going to work. Okay. Then we were having a conversation here about student-led conferences. Student-led conferences are a big part of that ownership piece too. And there's sometimes a miscommunication or a misunderstanding about what a student-led conference is. There's the parents come in and I go through all the things I'm supposed to show my parents, right? But that's not ownership. That's the set of every kid is probably going to say about the same kinds of things. I worked on this, then I did this, here's what I need to do, right? So that they're not owning that at that point. They're doing it, doing a student-led conference, but that is not ownership. So you've got to build in that structure, which is the great conversation we just had over here, is you got to teach the kids how to do that. So how do you have a student-led conference that is truly owned by the student? And having them really explain, here's where I was, here's where I am now, here's where I'm going, really establishes that growth mindset. It shows not only the student, but the parent, the progress that's been made, the skills within themselves that they're going to leverage to move forward. So those are my three big things I always, where was I, where am I now, and where am I going to go? And if kids can tell those things and really have ownership on that, then you've arrived. You've arrived to releasing that to them. So I do have, the other one that I love to do, and this goes back to that engagement question at the beginning. I'll have a resource for you. It's called Levels of Engagement. It's actually based on the work of, can't remember his first name, but Schlechte, who has 5 levels of engagement, and the students rate themselves. How engaged were you in this learning experience? That's another one of those. Students will be brutally honest. You've got your compliance kids. Yeah, I'm super engaged. I need to get a good grade on this so that I can get my credit and get out of this class, right? Or whatever. I mean, fill in the, you've got your compliant kids. Yep, I'm super engaged because that's what I've got to get done. And it goes down to the other end, right? The not engaged, the kids that will just sit in the back and pray that nobody calls on them or looks at them, right? I'm not going to be a distraction if you just don't look at me. I'll just be quiet. You've got that kid that's not engaged. And then you've got your rebellious kid that says, I am not doing that, and I'm going to do everything I can to get all my friends to not want to do that too, right? So the highly disengaged. So for that ownership part, having your kids on their exit tickets rate themselves on what was your engagement level on that. I wish you guys could see it, the different categories. But what was your engagement level and why? Kids will report being compliant. Yeah, I was engaged. but it's for the wrong reason. Kids will report being disengaged. That's when you got to drill in and say why. So that goes back to our original question of what makes kids want to be engaged? Well, if we don't ask them, we don't have a good understanding of that, we can't help them get there. And some kids, I work with an alternative school right now, most disadvantaged or most disengaged kids. The system they've come through, they are pretty sure school has zero value, right? And they're pretty sure teachers aren't gonna help at all. And we are working so hard to change that mindset, but the only way we can do that is by involving them in the conversation. But what is it you think we need to that needs to happen here? And then we help them find that. So really interesting conversations. So what I want to do here, we have about 4 minutes left. I want you to think about those 3 categories, and I want you to think about what level your classroom, your school, your district is in. Do you have the why? Is that clear? Why do we need relationships? Why do students need to have agency? Why do we want our kids to own their learning? Is the why clear? Then what processes need to be added or put into place that's going to make it sustainable? Not a one-time event of a Google form or something like that. That is not what we're talking about here. What's the process that's going to make it sustainable? And then what are you actually going to do? Okay? And here's what I want you to do. I always use 5, 10, 20 days. Always. We're talking about student ownership. The students can't own it unless the teachers own it. So the first 5 days, all about you, the teacher. What are you going to do in the next 5 days to learn more, to investigate more, to think, talk about, whatever? What are you going to do in the next 5 days that's just for you as the educator that's going to help put something into place? The next one is 10 days out. That's usually more of a process. What process do I have to change or have happen? Who do I need to talk to make that process be there? And the 20 days is, when am I going to start seeing this with my students? Now, you can go faster, but I think it's really important that you're giving yourself the time to absorb this first. I was the penguin running around. I would go to a conference like this, and I would come back with 12 really great ideas, right? And I wanted to do them all tomorrow. All right? So pace yourself. It doesn't all have to be tomorrow. It'll get there. But what are you going to start with? So commit to something. And then I always put those 2 questions at the bottom. How are you going to measure your success? And then how is it going to be measured by the students? That's the end goal. Now, this is not we call it educator effectiveness in Wisconsin. This is not an educator effectiveness. Somebody's going to come and check to see you if you actually did this, right? It's you yourself. How am I going to know I actually did my 5-day plan? I learned more about this. I embraced this. And then how are you going to start seeing that impact? It's almost a theory of action. If I do this, students will now start to do this. So think about it. If you're a theory of action person, you can do it that way. If I do this, students will do this. Or how will I know I've measured myself? How will I measure it with students? Okay? Take 2 or 3 minutes. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them now. I will find out how to get those. You can't even see my Twitter or anything now. So I will figure out how to get those to you if they're not on the website. here's my contact information. It's paula.kaiser@activatepathways.com. You can follow me on Twitter. Pathways does not have an A in the end, so activate, PATHWYS, because there's not enough letters that you can have for your Twitter handle. And then the resource folder I have for you, and it should be on the convening website, will have all of those resources that I showed too. If for whatever reason you can't find it or whatever, send me an email, something like that, and I am happy to send all of those to you. Okay? Thank you very much. I appreciate your time today.